Hello again, everybody. This is Sean Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Doing very well. I hope you're doing well.
Yep, good week so far.
It is a good week. And Sam, wouldn't it be great if the work week were just one day short?
Yeah, I mean, that's what everyone looks forward to. Labor Day, Memorial Day, for bankers, President's Day and Columbus Day. Um,
Listen, there are a lot of federal holidays, and that's one of the benefits of working for a depository institution, Sam, that really you get a lot of extra days off. Now, with that being said, Sam, I have been reading a lot recently, as have you, about the so-called four-day work week, and there are a number of different instances. I think recently Iceland finished up a study that the city of Reykjavik, as well as the central government there, are almost indistinguishable between the city of Reykjavik. But in any event, took something like 2,500 public service workers and some others and conducted a survey where they had a reduced work week and to determine whether or not it had any sort of appreciable impact on productivity, positive or negative. And this comes at an important time, particularly as we're coming out of COVID, or at least the worst of the lockdowns, where people were working at home, working remotely, where people are using things like Zoom, whatnot. And people want a lot of the flexibility that they had during the pandemic. And is the four-day work week, is something like that? Is that in keeping with sort of the flexibility that people want? And Sam, is a four-day work week good for the economy as much as it is for the individual workers who obviously don't want to be beholden to their employer 7 days a week? Catch my drift?
yeah, I mean, it is a trend. We've seen it for a couple years, really, this become kind of a bigger issue. And then obviously COVID, one of the big themes has been flexible working, and flexible can mean 1,000 different things. And this is obviously one of them, whether it's, taking a couple hours out per week, going from 40 to 35 or in some instances, in some countries and some specific companies within those countries, we've seen them actually do what you traditionally think of as a 4-day work week and taking the Friday off. And I think it's kind of tricky to fully answer the question. I think there is a ton of benefit to it. Obviously, it's would also be hard to implement in certain industries, and service industries probably aren't getting a traditional weekend anyway, so those wouldn't be impacted. But my gut feeling and some of the data I've looked at that doesn't really quantify all of the impact of it, but I tend to lean towards yes, that something like this or some more flexible work environment would probably, I think, have some sort of a net positive impact on the economy.
Well, Sam, I will tell you, and I've long maintained, and of course, this is really more for workers at a certain level, that employers pay for output. They pay for value added per employee, and time is just the construct that they use to determine that. You catch my drift? So,
Yeah.
like you, when we made an offer to you, I'm not sitting there trying to back into an hourly wage for you. I just assume, hey, this is what it is, and our normal office hours are X. Knock it out. So I'm paying you for your output and not necessarily your time. So when people talk about 4-day work week, or hell, we can talk about a 2-day work week. I'm going to pay you for your output, Sam. So that's one of those ones that the headlines that are talking this might not grasp the fact that most employers are really paying for output as opposed to time. That's one. And then two, some of the stuff that I've read, particularly the study on Iceland, and I know you've read some other ones about Japan and whatnot. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. It was less what I would call 4-day work week, and as much as a reduced work week, if that makes sense to you. Instead of a 40-hour work week, they were mandating a 35-hour work week or a 34-hour work week. For instance, here at Oakworth Capital Bank, our stated office hours for our employees is what, 8 to 5? That's when
Yep.
we're open. Hour off for lunch, technically, legally, I suppose, and that's a 40-hour work week, right? Now, what would happen if we took our office hours from 8:30 to 4:30, or from 9 to 5, or something like that? We could magically reduce the work week to 35 hours, truly, just by doing things like that. And I don't think that it would detrimentally impact the overall output of any one particular worker here. So we could sit there and say our worker productivity went up dramatically just by reducing the work week by 1 hour. but we really didn't increase our output, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the easier. I talked about it being difficult to figure out how this would work and quantifying it, and that path is a little easier to wrap your brain around. If you go from, like you said, 8 to 5 to 8:30 to 4:30, okay, people just start learning to go to places a little bit later or get there a little earlier before they close. I don't think that has necessarily, it's a big detractor to businesses, but I also think some of the benefits that I imagine with this don't have the same impact with that sort of scenario. So it's kind of a two-way street that I view it as. The bigger swing you make towards worker productivity and the hours worked, the more difficult it would be to implement. And also on the flip side, the more benefits you would receive from it, economically speaking.
And Sam, let me ask you this question. This is you as a person, not necessarily as an associate of Oakworth Capital Bank. Let's say you've got a task that you really don't want to do, or something that you just it doesn't interest you all that much, and some power above you says you have to have this done in 2 hours. You can't leave. It's 2 hours. Well, you might take up that full 2 hours because you're not terribly interested, right?
Right.
But for that exact same task, someone comes in and says, you have 1 hour to do this. Guess what? You're going to probably do it in an hour.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying in terms of, but it's still the same task. That's still kind of going back to what I was saying. You're going to get paid for your output, not necessarily for your time. So some of these studies, I would say, that are showing worker productivity going up without any sort of detrimental loss in overall output are probably just sitting there saying, okay, well, gee whiz, workers haven't changed their output. All we've done is just reduce the amount of time that they can do it. And so I would say, if you want to reduce workers' hours to 35 hours a week or whatever, even 4 days a week, that's fine. But however, you're not going to accept a reduction in output. The output's not changed, just the amount of time that we're giving you to do it.
Right. And I think a trend that would help this going forward is the trend towards data, big data, and KPIs and things of that nature. And that's something that every business, specifically over the past year and a half, has talked about. Is okay, how do we quantify the work that our employees are doing, especially in some industries where it's a little harder to quantify. If you're a commercial loan officer, you're probably judged on the amount of loans that you bring in, and that's a little easier to quantify. And maybe the hours you're there don't matter as much as long as you're bringing in the production that you're getting paid for.
That's right.
Those instances make sense. There's a lot of businesses and a lot of positions at companies that, they do valuable work and they can justify their pay. But as soon as it gets harder to quantify and the person's maybe not in the office doing it all the time, it maybe gets a little trickier. And so I think the trend towards data and KPIs and understanding the value that all employees are bringing to this would help kind of justify some of these reductions in hours, because then you may be able to really quantitatively say this person is still able to produce the same amount of work in the less time. And therefore, we can still justify paying them either the same or maybe slightly less if their production goes down a little. But, having some more ammunition to back this up is something that I think is going to really be necessary before this ever gets implemented significantly in our country and really the global economy.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think some of the stuff that you were just talking about probably lends itself a little bit better to more creative type professions or things that, a standard 8 to 5 type workday just really doesn't apply. I mean, that can be any number of different things, working on a marketing proposal, doing creative work, ad agency, that type of thing. You really don't need to, I mean, the 8 to 5, that really doesn't matter quite as much as the creativity of the product or the proposal itself. However, there are some jobs that no matter how much we want to be flexible, no matter how much we want to, do whatever we can to make them attractive, are still going to be butts in the seats type jobs that we're just not going to get away from it. For instance, while the number of tellers in the U.S. economy is going to go down with the number of bank branches, being a bank teller is not one of these jobs that you can work remotely.
Right.
That there's not a lot of flexibility there. A bank teller really kind of needs to be there. A receptionist can't really, work remotely, can't really reduce their hours to see if they're any more productive. So there just will always be some, and we can also argue that perhaps those jobs are going the way of the dinosaur. But even so, we will have any number of jobs that's going to be very difficult in order to sort of go to a 4-day work week or reduce hours, because they just have to be there when the doors are open. You just can't get around that. However, the more knowledge based jobs or back office type jobs, those are the ones where I think you might be able to get around some of this, or be more flexible and produce or mandate a shorter work week. And you might not, as I mentioned, you won't see any reduction in output. And as a matter of fact, shoot, you probably know people that are 100% commission. You can figure out those days they'll do whatever they want.
Yep.
I mean, it's bond salesman sells a 5 million block of bonds with a full point in it. Guess what? He's bugging off the remainder of the day. I mean,
Yep.
and why wouldn't you? I mean, that's where that output is. So I think we need to be very careful here, and saying 4-day work week, reduce hours is good for everyone, and everyone should get it, when not all jobs lend itself to that. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's always going to be a difficulty. The like you mentioned, a bank teller, really just any sort of in-person job. I mean, even take construction workers. What does this mean? That some employees have the first 4 days of the week they work, and others have the last four, and so some get Monday off, some get Friday off. Because if it's everybody gets Friday off, you're going to have issues with getting projects done on time. I think of the financial market as a whole. The financial market's open 5 days a week. People that are managing portfolios where it's an eat what you kill type environment, especially, are not going to want to take that fifth day off and just leave things to the wind. So it's hard for me to imagine this ever becoming just completely implemented across the country, where Friday, Saturday, Sunday are Fridays viewed the same as Saturday and Sunday currently are, where everything's essentially shut down except service industries, entertainment and restaurants and things like that. That's really, really hard for me to wrap my brain around, at least in the next, say, century, that could happen.
Did you say 6 centuries?
I said century. Say century.
I was going, boy, you've really taken a long-term approach with this.
Buy and hold, baby.
Yeah. It's all that work you've been doing on 15th century, economic practices in the Habsburg Empire. I think that's come to the fore. Sam, I'll tell you, people of your generation probably are expecting a lot more flexibility, are probably far more keen to perk up their ears when they're hearing about 4-day work weeks and what have you, as compared to my generation. Now, certainly my generation loves the flexibility, that we got from COVID-19 or what have you. But at the end of the day, a lot of us have just been so accustomed to going into the office as a matter of routine that it's going to be very difficult to sit there and say, okay, you're now working 4 days a week, because it's part of the structure of our work lives, that we get up, we go and do something for a period of time. And human beings are really kind of creatures of habit. And so that's one of those ones that, if you reduce the work week in any form or fashion, 4 days or 35 hours, what you're really going to do is really throw a wrench in my OCD behavior. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I won't speak towards your OCD behavior, but people are creatures of habit. And there's a lot of things like that will be difficult, especially generational things. Any sort of big shift like this has to typically be led by the top of an organization. If you move your hours from 8 to 5 to 9 to 5, and the C-suite people still show up at 7:30, a lot of people are going to still want to show up at 7:30 or 7:25 and beat them there. And so it has to, any seismic shift to a company culture, whether it's dress code or hours worked or whatever it is, taking vacation and sick time, has to start at the top. And I think people are right to do it, but you kind of want to act like your boss does. And there's a lot of things that you want to implement that the people above you already do. So I think that is something that would have to really happen. And I think, like you said, with people being creatures of habit, I think that would be pretty difficult to implement at the C-suite level.
I think you're probably right. I personally, and this is between us and anyone who's listening, we could, the banking industry could probably change its hours to 8:30 to 4:30 and not really see any sort of significant change in output.
Well, especially when, transfer cutoffs are what, 1 to 2 p.m., market closes at 3 p.m. Central. There's a lot of things that have to happen before 4:30, especially. So, yeah, I think you're right. And 8:30, that's when the market opens here. So it's hard to argue with that there would be such a big impact from a slight decrease in hours.
And so I do think that there is some validity to some of these studies that you can reduce the work week and not reduce worker productivity. However, I just don't think that that's really terribly insightful, given the fact that businesses again pay for output as opposed to time. The only person that gets paid for time is someone that's a security guard or someone you just security guard in I don't know, at a church. I mean, it's just where someone just has to be there. I mean,
Yeah.
but everything that we do here is based on output. It's not based on hours.
Yeah, and I think you could see in some of the studies out of Japan and probably some other ones have shown slight increases in productivity, and so maybe there is kind of a fine line, and it's maybe like a Laffer curve type thing where there's a point of increased, it goes up a little bit if you decrease time a little bit, and then there probably reaches a point where it becomes a negative thing, and 8:30 to 4:30, that may boost morale for a lot of employees enough to where they work a little harder when they're there because they know they're leaving a little earlier. And so maybe there is some validity to that. And but it's hard to imagine, like you said, if you're getting paid for productivity, maybe peeling some of the least productive time out of the day off helps. But if you really start to take chunks out of the most productive time of a work week, it's hard to imagine having the same level of productivity.
Listen, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And then, probably some of the concerns of people my age or even older than that is, okay, let's say we go from an 8:30 to a 4:30. Okay, what's going to keep us from going to a 9 to a 4? And then all of a sudden, that's when you really start seeing that, oh, holy smoke, maybe we're not getting the same level of output. Maybe the output does start declining at some point. They're still pretty productive per hour, but the overall level of output's not the same. That means you have to go hire people, and it just gets terribly expensive. So yeah, it's just awfully expensive. And
See, that doesn't concern me personally. A 30-minute, you can only worry about a snowball effect too much, and
well, I will tell you, it's sort of at the end of the day, it's something like that sounds great. It's pretty interesting. You'll see some of the more probably highly skilled type of offices or industries maybe move to something like that, but I will be willing to bet you dollars to donuts, which used to make sense, but now now that certain donuts are more than $1, it doesn't any longer. What you'll probably find is the way that it's always really been. Your most productive workers, the people that generate the most revenue for the company, the people that are most in line for promotions and career advancement, probably aren't people that are sitting around worrying about how many hours per week that they work. Whether it be 40 or whether it be 35 or what time the bank opens or what time it closes or something along those lines. Yeah, you got to fill up your day, but ultimately what you're really looking to do is increase the output. And if it takes you 30 hours, that's great. If it takes you 50 hours, that's great too. So doing something like this, for the top 25% of workers, I don't think they care. It's sort of that bottom 75% of workers, which make up obviously the majority of the workforce, where this type of stuff is exciting, and it probably doesn't change the amount of output that they're going to generate, just reduces the amount of time that they're going to do it in.
Yeah, I think it's generational too. I think obviously you can separate the types of workers, but I think there's a very large push generationally to have some more flexibility there, and maybe this is one of the avenues for it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, frankly, Sam, I don't care. I mean, listen, our office hours are our office hours. If we change them, great too. But if we give you a project, or Scott gives me a project to do and says, you got to get it done, well, I'm just going to knock it out.
Yeah. I
30.
mean, same thing we do now. If I need to stay a little later to get something done, I stay a little later to get something done. And, for good workers, that doesn't change.
True that. So the 4-day work week, reduction in hours, positive or negative for the economy? Your thoughts?
Positive.
I'd say it's a push. I'd say you're not going to see any change in overall output or capacity, and that's ultimately what matters. You might see individual productivity increase, but not overall output. That's my thoughts. All right. So 4-day work week, better for the individual or not?
Yeah, I'd say it's better for the individual, but what we picture 4-day work week, I don't really view that currently working. If we're talking like what Iceland did and just kind of minimizing hours, cutting, 8 to 5 to 9 to 5, I'm fine with that. But I think taking an extra day off is going to be pretty difficult for the economy.
I think so too. I think we would have to certainly work our way into that, an extra hour off per workday. Frankly, I think we'll probably see a lot of firms move in that direction, regardless of the study that the Icelanders did or what the Japanese are doing over in what is it, IBM,
Microsoft.
What they're doing over there. You'll probably see more firms move in that direction as more people can work from home and as more jobs don't require fannies in the seats for 40 hours a week. Fair enough?
Yep.
All right, guys. We always love hearing from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, by all means, please drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakwood.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you want to read more, hear more of what we have to say or think or write or what have you, by all means, go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab. All right, Sam, got anything else to say about 4-day work weeks?
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.